Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. Three of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Here's a story you might have missed. Earlier this month, parents, teachers, and elected officials rallied to demand that Mayor Zohran Mamdani impose a 2-year moratorium on artificial intelligence in New York City public school classrooms. They delivered a petition with more than 2,200 signatures to the mayor's senior education advisor, First Deputy Mayor Dean Fullahan, citing risks to, quote, student privacy, cognitive development, creativity, and the environment, unquote, according to the Daily News. An East Harlem parent told the reporter, the mayor has mayoral control of public schools, so he can just say, slow your horses. Now, that rally came after New York City's Department of Education unveiled its preliminary guidelines for using AI in schools, almost 3 years after a short-lived ban on ChatGPT. The Department of Education began soliciting public feedback on its preliminary guidelines, but declared up front, quote, the question is not whether AI belongs in schools. The question is whether we will collectively build a system that governs AI to serve every student and every stakeholder. Our next guest calls that statement quite the rhetorical suplex, opening a debate by declaring its central premise off limits. So there's one recent headline that you may have missed here in New York City, but AI tools are not waiting for education policy across the country to catch up. A February Pew Research Center survey found that 60% of teenagers say students at their school use chatbots to cheat very often or somewhat often, and parents, you may already be aware that AI tools come pre-installed in the Google Chromebooks that many children take home for remote learning. In a recent national survey, about 80% of teachers report having them in their K-12 schools, those Chromebooks. Jessica Winter's piece in The New Yorker takes a close look at AI tools in classrooms across the country and asks, what will it take to get AI out of schools? That's the headline. Jessica, welcome to WNYC.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
And I'll tell listeners that you open your piece with these lines. I don't like AI, and I am raising my children not to like it. And then you talk to your kids about AI the way you might warn them about a creepy neighbor to, quote, avoid eye contact, cross the street when you walk past his house, unquote. But then your son comes home from third grade with a certificate of completion for a drag-and-drop computer game made by Amazon. So tell us about that moment and when you realized that both of your own children were already being exposed to AI tools in their classrooms.
Right. So my third grader, and I should say I'm in Massachusetts, but until a couple of years ago, both of my kids were in New York City DOE schools. My third grader came home with this certificate of achievement. And when I looked into it, he had just played a computer game. It didn't really have much to do with AI. It was sort of a branding exercise for code.org and Amazon Future Engineer. So I was a little irritated by it, but I wasn't too concerned. When I got really dismayed was when my sixth grader came home from school with a new Chromebook, which was installed with a suite of Gemini AI tools. Google, in the past year, rolled out an all ages version of Gemini. And as you mentioned in the introduction, Chromebooks are nearly ubiquitous in schools. So now they come installed with this suite of AI tools that is constantly giving kids prompts. Let the tool help you write, or beautify your slideshow, or whatever the case may be. And I was really dismayed. As you mentioned, I've taught my kids to have, I think, a healthy wariness and caution around AI, and really around anything from the big tech companies in general. I just don't think that their childhoods need to be wrapped up in screens and gamified tech. And I think that schools' reliance on Chromebooks and ed tech and now on AI, which we've now experienced in two school systems, really puts a strain on those kinds of values. And so, yeah, I just feel like parents are kind of coming into conflict in ways that they don't want to be with AI policy in schools because there's basic questions around AI and whether AI should be in schools in the first place that just aren't being answered or are being skipped over.
Listeners, do you have any story, or you can ask a question, but I wonder if there are any more stories out there like the ones that Jessica Winter from the New Yorker was just telling us about her own kids and how schools themselves are feeding the kids to AI tools. 212-433 WNYC. And do you care? Or do you think AI can be managed for the greater good in the context of education, or should just be booted out to the maximum extent possible? 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. You can call or you can text with your stories or comments or questions. I'll note that a Google vice president for education told you that Gemini's aim is to, quote, empower the educators, and that Google is, quote, not the pedagogical experts. So describe what the people who create these tools told you. What do they believe or claim they are doing that's in the public interest or problem that they are trying to solve?
They will say that they're here to help educators do the best job that they can, to help educators save time on, the more tedious tasks of grading or coming up with lesson plans, and that they are trying to maximize the amount of time that educators have for one-on-one data-driven interactions with their students so that they have the most information possible about each individual student and give them bespoke instruction and bespoke interaction to speak to their strengths and find their areas of growth. In the earlier grades, I was troubled by the extent to which there's this assumption that a child's piece of writing can be fed into an AI, or a child's drawing or artwork can be fed into AI to make something more impressive or to make something that the child, him or herself, could not achieve. That is something that people in ed tech and people in AI for education are excited about. And I just speaking as a parent and a layperson, I am not excited about that. I don't think that a child needs to be told that technology is here to make their work more impressive. Another issue that comes up a lot is that AI can save teachers time, that AI can write emails to parents from teachers, that AI can generate feedback for students on their papers or on their projects. One person I spoke with, I didn't quote this in the piece, but they said that they were working on a feedback tool where the feedback was just, it was too long, that it was spitting out hundreds and hundreds of words of feedback, and they had to figure out a way for the feedback to be shorter, more concise, and also so that the student receiving the feedback wouldn't realize it was AI. And this was, again, very dismaying to me because it seems to mistake the whole purpose of a teacher's role in a student's life. I don't think anyone wants to receive AI-generated emails about their child's progress in school. I don't see the point of a student receiving feedback from AI, especially when we're telling students not to write papers or to cheat with AI. And we get into a situation where just robots are talking to each other, and I don't know what any of this has to do with education. I
Yeah.
believe that these technologists believe in what they're doing, but I personally, and a lot of the experts with whom I spoke, don't see a whole lot that's convincing here, certainly not in the earlier grades.
On Chromebooks in particular, a Google product, I mentioned the stat in the intro that in a recent national survey, about 80% of teachers report having them in their K through 12 schools. The COVID pandemic drove sales up by 287%, is the stat that I have, in a single year. Because of all the remote learning, they wanted kids to have Chromebooks. And these Chromebooks, as you report, come with all these sort of automatic AI prompts in many cases when kids open a page to write an essay, things like that. Listener writes, however, in regular Chrome, it is still possible to turn off AI tools. Is that possible on Chromebooks?
It depends on what the settings are. And this again speaks to a lack of formal guidelines and a lack of sort of universal standards that can be applied. Sometimes you can turn them off, sometimes you can't. There's no universal standard for whether or not a child, I know on my daughter's Chromebook, she can't turn it off. She just has to ignore it.
I want to take a call from somebody who I think is going to push back on your premise. Again,
Okay.
the title of your article, or let's say how far you go in your premise. If the title of the article is "What Will It Take to Get AI Out of Schools?" Jane on the Upper East Side has a thought about that. Jane, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Yes, hi. Yes, my name is Jane Hatterer. I am an AI literacy advocate. I've been working in this space for over 3 years, both in city, state, and national coalitions. My concern with the head in the sand approach to this technology, which is ubiquitous beyond within our education system, but across industries, is that we're doing a disservice to our students in terms of their college career and civic readiness, which is what the state requires of our graduates of public education. And to be literate, AI literate, is a comprehensive term and defined differently by different people, but it essentially will provide agency to our students to decide if, when, and how to use these tools in a manner that is pro-social, ethical, and responsible, with consideration for impact on the environment and their communities. And so I think if we take, the fact remains that we are way behind other countries in terms of AI literacy education. China, the UAE mandated throughout K-12. That if we don't educate our students on how to use these tools in ways that will help them think critically, collaborate with others, create in ways that are effective and protect intellectual copyrights, etc., we're going to make them more vulnerable and less prepared. And I think we do need the guidance. New York City finally, after 3 years, came out with guidance, which is still open for public comment and will be an iterative process. We need guidance. We also need regulation. So I think it's twofold. I think we need to promote literacy and understand that there are data security concerns, there are privacy concerns, which, by the way, are accounted for by the school system. But
Jane, let me jump in because you put a lot on the table here, and I think you two might have an interesting conversation. So, Jessica, talk to Jane.
Jane, at what age do you think that AI literacy should be introduced into schools? Which grade?
I think they can be introduced. It can be introduced in elementary school in ways that are age appropriate. I mean,
so what would that look like?
There could be games that they could be engaging with that would be secure in terms of which they would be regardless if they're used in school context in terms of any kind of personal identification, etc.
What kinds of games?
In which they're taught concepts. Well, there was a woman who was an ELA instructor who used, and this had to do with visuals, who showed very young students pictures of different animals and asked them to create a story around them using some basic tools. And with these tools, they were able to create their own story about a lizard or a snake or a frog. But the point is, it was enhancing their ability to realize narrative. So there are, I mean, I
Children
could come
have
up with
learned
other
about
examples.
narrative and drawing pictures and creating stories and using their imaginations for untold generations. What makes the AI experience of creating a story about a lizard and a frog superior to children using their own hands and their own imaginations and paper and pencil
Well, they may have
to
greater
create that
capacity with the
experience?
tool.
Why do they need that
They
greater
could use
capacity if
it.
they're in elementary school? Why do they need that? How does that benefit them in terms of motor skills, in terms of working memory, in terms of relying on themselves, their own creativity, their own inner resources, and not outsourcing those beautiful gifts to a machine that
I'm
wants
not
to
saying,
extract their data and monetize them? Why is that a
well,
superior
we're not
experience?
talking about extracting data and monetizing within the context of an elementary school classroom. I mean, that's because that's not going to happen, because these tools
Well,
would
it
not
is
be allowed
happening.
in the use. Well, not in an elementary school classroom. I mean, they have to be compliant. I mean, unless maybe at home, maybe outside the classroom, which is all the more reason to make students aware of various,
Well, let's take a real
implications.
example,
I don't believe.
Amira. Let's take the example of Amira. Amira is a reading app that is used, I
Right.
believe, from kindergarten to third grade. And Amira came up over and over again in my reporting as a source of concern for parents. Children read to Amira, and Amira records the children's voices and offers feedback. There are a lot of self-evident concerns with this, and there isn't necessarily compliance in place depending on the district and the school. For one thing, a child's voice is a form of data, biometric data, that should not be collected without a parent's consent or really at all. That was happening. Second, Amira does not necessarily account for different regional accents, for speech delays, for any number of factors that have nothing to do with reading comprehension. And I think third and most important, a lot of parents simply don't want their kids talking to a robot. They want their kids interacting with other kids and with teachers. And so again, the
Well, I don't. Yeah.
emphasis on these synthetic interactions and the potential harm that they have on social emotional development is almost secondary to the question of why is this superior? Why is this what we have to be doing? How have we manufactured consent for this type of pedagogy over any other? How did that happen? How did it happen so quickly? And how did
Sure.
parents not even really know it was happening?
Can I
Jane, I'll give you
respond?
Yeah, of
one
course,
more
please.
response, and we
Yes.
really appreciate your
Just
call. Go ahead.
Just quickly, I don't think the proposition is that these tools should be in any way replacing other forms of instruction, of teacher-student relationships. The idea is to free up the teachers to actually have more time of personalized instruction. There are access issues. There are language ways in which these tools can support in language, ESL, with other learners, with IEPs. And I agree that there should be foundational skills that are also imparted to young students, to all students. It's not a replacement. I think that's a false flag.
Jane, I'm going to leave it there. I thank you very much for your call and engaging with our guest.
Thank you, Jane.
And Jessica, thank you for engaging that robustly with the caller. I guess if there's a bottom line to all the specifics that she was throwing out there, it's that your premise goes too far if what you want to do is get AI out of schools completely, rather than, and maybe just, acknowledging reality in the world today, figuring out how to most effectively and in the public interest deploy it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked Jane which grade, when she thinks that AI literacy should begin, I do think that there are all kinds of use cases for AI at the high school level to organize data for transcription. I would love for my kids, once they reach the high school level, to have a module on the history of the development of artificial intelligence, AI literacy, digital and media literacy, in general. I think it would be wonderful for children at some developmentally appropriate age to learn how this stuff works. I mean, we could almost approach it like sex education. Sex education usually starts around sixth, seventh, eighth grade, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not an absolutist in the later grades, but I think in the earlier grades I am. And just to speak to another point that Jane made that people make all the time, which is that we don't want to leave our students and our children behind in the job market. But the fact of the matter is we don't know what AI is going to look like 15 or 20 years from now. Certainly we couldn't have imagined what it's like now a few years ago, not a layperson, certainly. And I think that the idea that a child is going to be left in the dust in the labor market because he's not talking to a chat bot in elementary school is frankly it's not a serious question.
Jessica, we're coming near the end of what we told you was our scheduled time, but we have so many callers on our completely full board who have stories or questions, and there are things that because we let you and the caller Jane interact for a while, which I'm really glad we did. I haven't gotten to yet, like about the White House summit with First Lady Melania Trump standing next to Figure
right.
oh 03, a humanoid robot who you wrote about. So can you stay the rest of the hour?
Sure.
We'll continue with Jessica Winter and many of your calls and texts and those questions I cited right after this. Brian Lehrer on WNYC as we continue with Jessica Winter on her piece in The New Yorker called What Will It Take to Get AI Out of Schools? We're going to talk to a caller next who has a story. I think the caller considers it a horror story about their daughter in first grade. And then to Micah Nyack, who's an education student currently at community college and maybe has a nuanced take on how he wants to use AI as a high school teacher eventually. So Damien in Irvington, you're on WNYC. Hello to Irvington on Hudson. Hi, Damien.
Hi there. Yeah. So my first grader, we goes to a wonderful elementary school. She came home from first grade a couple weeks ago and announced that they'd been making storybooks for the kindergartners, one level down from them, which is wonderful, and I love it. But she also announced that they were using, quote, AI to do it. And, she's 6, so it's hard to get a handle on exactly how they were using it or whatever, but it wasn't really disclosed to us, and I found it just a repulsive idea. I mean, here they are using their growing powers of imagination, their very new literacy, they've just learned to write, and their drawing skills, and they're outsourcing this to AI. It seems insane to me, and I have to push back so hard on that previous caller, Jane, because she was saying that this doesn't replace human interaction, blah, blah, blah. But I'm sorry, every minute she spends with a Chromebook or an AI chatbot displaces that amount of time she could be talking with a teacher or another student.
Damien, did you interact with the school about this at all?
Not yet, but a bunch of us, I've been talking to some other parents, and people are talking about not signing the technology consent form that we're asked to sign every year. Talking about not signing that next year to opt out of all this Chromebook garbage, because I don't understand why they would even be using Chromebooks to begin with at this age.
Jessica, any advice for Damien or any other reaction?
Damien, I agree with everything you said, and your comments echo what I've heard from a lot of parents and educators. There's a wonderful group that I write about in my piece called Schools Beyond Screens, which started among some parents in Los Angeles. And one of the concerns that they brought up that's really nuanced and important is that parents do sign this this kind of blanket waiver at the beginning of school years, and they don't really know what they're signing necessarily. And it really has to be kind of itemized for each product, each app. So that you know that, okay, it's okay for my student to use this, but I'm not quite sure about that. The Chromebook ubiquity, the kind of the inevitability of the Chromebook in students' educations is really, really troubling. My sixth grader, so a little older than Damien's child, but I couldn't opt her out if I wanted to. She uses the Chromebook for every single class. She uses it for homework. To opt them out of the Chromebook in some cases is like opting them out of school itself. And I think that's especially tragic given that the Chromebooks are sort of a vestige of the pandemic in many schools. The reason why students spend so much time on Chromebooks in a lot of cases is because they were habituated to do so during the pandemic, during remote learning. I don't think anyone thinks back fondly to remote learning. I think a lot of people found it incredibly painful and difficult, but somehow this vestige, this machine that doesn't even really work very well, it's just cheap and easy to obtain, has remained with us and kind of gained so much power over our students' experience of school and of learning. And so the question of AI is really knit up in this larger question of ed tech and this larger question of why we are so wedded to the Chromebooks and can we get away from the Chromebooks? Is that even possible? I think it is. I have to believe it is because I think that our children's education would be better if we could get free of it.
Damien, let us know how this goes between you and the other parents in the school. It would be interesting to follow up.
I will. I think people are organizing around it, so I'll keep you guys posted. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your call. And from Irvington, we go up one town and across the Tappan Zee Bridge to Mike in Nyack. Mike, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling in.
Hey, thanks, Brian. This is just an incredible topic that you guys are talking about, and I just want to say that the speaker you have today is just, she has such a common sense approach to this issue that I think a lot of parents are just so happy, and it's so refreshing to hear. So, as I said when I called in, I'm currently a education major in CUNY. I'm doing a late stage career change, and my goal is to teach high school social studies. Excuse me. CUNY is a great school. That's a plug for CUNY. I love it. I haven't seen anything yet this is my first semester, but I haven't seen anything yet to like approaching AI or stuff or anything like that in the curriculum. And I think it's just because it's moving so fast that the school hasn't caught up to it, but I think that's a necessity that needs to happen. But one thing I have seen, now that I'm into this like world of education, is with the Common Core standard, there's such a push to cover as much material as possible. And my fear with AI, from my perspective, not just and I am a parent of 3 kids, is if they think if educators or people are so pressed to cover so much material and they think that there's an opportunity in AI, they're going to rush to it. And as we see in society today, I mean, whenever there's some kind of new technology, we rush to it, not thinking that what we're giving up has more value than what we're rushing into. And that's my biggest fear. I think that the other caller, Jane, brought up good points. I mean, at some point, we can't stick our head in the sand when we have to address this and educate kids on how to like approach a workforce knowing about AI. But to think that this is going to be introduced at the elementary level, just a quick example. I have a daughter in 6th grade. I have 2 kids, 3 kids, 2 in a private school that doesn't use screens, Blue Rock School, and then 1 in the public school. We constantly have to keep the one in the public school who's in 3rd grade off his Chromebook when he's home, and my daughter who's in 6th grade, she draws these amazing cartoons. They're just like, they're beautiful. She'll sit there on a table and draw for like 2-3 hours, these like very witty, like kind of anime themed cartoons. She was introduced to AI recently, and she was on a computer screen, and it was just horrible. Like watching her, these skills and abilities that she has, like the other caller said, being like commandeered. Like it just puts these skills that kids need in atrophy. Not to mention, like your guest brought up about the interpersonal skills. Like as a parent, not just as a person going into the education field, but as a parent, it is frightening how fast we rush into this, not thinking about the consequence of what's going to happen. And
you just used the word atrophy, and Jessica's article cites an MIT study from just last year warning that integration of large language models into learning environments, quote, may inadvertently contribute to cognitive atrophy, what a thing to be facing, right? In the context of something that's supposed to be an advancement, cognitive atrophy. But Mike, for you, as preparing to be a high school social studies teacher, as I understand it, and thinking that you do need AI literacy in that context, how do you envision using it as a high school social studies teacher when you get to that point, if you've thought it through at all yet?
I haven't thought of it too much, but talking to people who are in academia, I have one of the parents at my school. He works in Vassar College, and he talks about how they're trying to wrestle with AI in terms of being sure that students are competent enough in their field to go forward, and not their own, abilities are not being replaced by an AI, when it comes to papers and things like that. For me, honestly, I don't even know what it's going to look like 3 years from now, but my goal is, I think, the current political situation we have is because a lack of understanding on social studies and history, where that those topics can be so easily commandeered by political parties or figures. I think that's very important, and I'm happy to go into this field. I think there's a critical skill set that is really necessary that can't be replaced by computers. I don't know what it's going to look like when I get to a school, and I don't know what freedom I'm going to have as a teacher to be able to reject it and say, I don't want to do that, because like I said, there's such a push to recover material over a course of a school year.
Right.
If I feel like if administrators feel that they can do it with AI, they're not going to ask questions.
Mike, I really appreciate your call. Sounds like education is going to be lucky to have you as a teacher when you get to that point. So good luck with that and the kids. Any quick reaction to that caller, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I think the phrase head in the sand comes up a lot when people are pushing against AI use in schools. But I think that we also risk putting our heads in the sand, as Mike was acknowledging, about the harms and the risks of these tools at any age. I mean, the study that you just cited, Brian, that was among adults, that use of LLMs, use of generative AI causes cognitive atrophy because people are not doing the contemplative work of thinking through questions on their own, whether it's, questions of history and civics and the kinds of topics in a social studies classroom that the caller will be teaching soon, or any number of social emotional interactions that people are having, or just thinking through a math problem. All of these little things really add up. And so if you are over relying on an LLM, we really do have a lot of evidence to show that you're simply not doing cognitive muscle maintenance, right? Social emotional muscle maintenance. And so if you extrapolate that, if you imagine the effects on a brain that is still developing, that still has a long way to go, it's hard to even imagine what the harmful effects might be. And we can only imagine it because we have very little research on the effects of AI in education at the K through 12 or the K through 8 level. So again, people who trumpet the inevitability of AI in education, it's here, there's nothing we can do about it. Well, we don't really know what we're working with yet. And I think for a lot of other people, the first question is not how do we use these tools, but why and should we be in the first place?
Right.
So I'm also grateful that people like Mike are entering education and grappling with these questions in a really thoughtful way.
Before we run out of time, I did say I would ask you about that Melania Trump event with a humanoid robot where she asked the audience to imagine it as a teacher who was, quote, always patient and always available, unquote. What was that? Was that a tech industry sales pitch that they got her involved with, or a policy thing, or what was that?
What a great question. What was that, Brian? I mean, I was horrified, but I mean, it almost felt like a prank, didn't it? This kind of slow moving, slow speaking robot. It didn't really have a face. It just had a kind of blank screen. I mean, I don't think anyone would sleep well at night imagining that Figure 3 would be teaching their children much of anything. So yeah, I can't really speculate on who thought that was a good idea, but it certainly was the opposite of an advertisement or an endorsement for kind of the androidification of American education.
So in our last 30 seconds, the title of your article was a question: what will it take to get AI out of schools? So assuming that's the goal of you and some others, in 30 seconds, do you have a list of things?
Well, I think that we can look to the parents in New York City and the parents in Los Angeles and elsewhere who are organizing on these issues, who are rallying, and who are appealing to elected officials for change. And actually, the parents in Los Angeles did get the Los Angeles Unified School District Board to sign on to some limitations on screen use in those schools. It wasn't an AI specific resolution, but less screen
Screens
time means
generally.
less AI time.
All right, we leave it there with Jessica Winters, staff writer at the New Yorker, covering family and education. Thank you very much for sharing your article with us today and engaging so interesting with callers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Today through Saturday in Greenwich Village and in Los Angeles, the annual World Voices Festival is taking place from the group PEN America. They describe it as uniting 140 writers from 40 countries to celebrate literature and defend free expression at a time that it's under escalating attacks. PEN America itself is trying to recover from a free expression controversy. 2 years ago, this festival was canceled after dozens of writers decided not to attend, accusing it of failing to adequately address the plight of Palestinian writers and Palestinian culture overall. Its longtime executive director, Suzanne Nossel, left after that. Some writers thought the boycott of PEN went too far, that criticism was one thing, trying to take down an organization that works to defend free speech against all kinds of authoritarianism was counterproductive, but many writers did boycott. Now PEN America has new leadership, is talking about the controversy. The World Voices Festival itself is back. And joining us to discuss all this are the new PEN America president, the writer Dinao Mengistu. He's been a MacArthur Genius Grant winner, among other awards, and among his novels is his latest, released last year, Someone Like Us, which, among other things, former President Barack Obama put on his 10 best books of the year list for 2025. Also with us, one of the two new PEN America co-CEOs, Clarice Rosas Sharif, who has held various programming leadership positions at PEN America, and her bio page says before coming there, she spent over a decade at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library, working with writers, scholars, artists, and librarians to curate and produce more than 100 year-round free public programs on the global Black experience. Dinao and Clarice, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to WNYC.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Brian, for having us.
Clarice, for the uninitiated, what is PEN America and what is the World Voices Festival?
Right. So PEN America is an organization that is more than 103 years old. We are a free expression organization, and we have a really, simple and important mission that is to celebrate literature and to defend free expression. And this is an enduring mission that is more relevant today in a world where writers, artists are facing threats that are existential. It is a very scary time for many people, including writers, to feel that they can speak without facing harassment. We have seen how far it goes when we have people expressing their opinions or expressing dissent. And we have had in Minneapolis the very tragic death of Renee Good, for example. So this is a tough time, and our organization is focused on defending this really basic principle of free speech. And this is without free speech, we do not have the liberties and the other rights that everyone, should enjoy. And we should not take for granted that that this is something that is very much at risk here in the U.S. and still across the world. So that's a little bit about Pan America.
Let's address the controversy, and then we'll get to some of the events at this year's World Voices Festival. Dinah, I saw you quoted in the New York Times saying it was very fair for writers to say no, I guess referring to the boycott 2 years ago, and ask us to do more. Does that mean you feel the organization, I'm asking you, does that mean you feel the organization did underreact, at least initially, to Israel's military operation in Gaza as it affects free expression?
I think, free expression is always going to be a contentious issue. And then also trying to understand that the threats to our free expression are not equal. Sometimes some bodies, some organizations, some individuals are under much greater threat than others. And I think when we look back on what happened in 2024, I think PEN America was trying its hardest to balance these sort of, complex competing desires to address the ongoing devastation in Gaza while also being aware of the numerous other challenges to free expression around the country and around the world. And, I think we found ourselves trying to balance and juggle too many different competing concerns. And as a result, it was sometimes difficult to see just how much needed to be done in order to address the scale of enormous tragedy that was taking place in Gaza.
So, Clarice, last September, PEN America did issue a report that described, quote, destruction of Gaza's cultural heritage, unquote. Would you say some of what the report found?
Yes, I mean, the report is only one piece of the work that we do to sound the alarm on threats to expression globally, and on the international stage. I think in Gaza, we focused in this report on what happens when cultural destruction is on that level. We are, a free expression organization, an organization of writers, and we know the importance of literature, of culture, of stories, and we need to always, protect and raise our voices and campaign very hard when the writers and the work that they produce is at risk. And so, this was an important piece of work that we felt that we had to do, but this is also a very small part of what the organization does year round. I just want to say, Brian, that when we talk about the controversy, I just want also to be clear that last year's festival in 2025 was a beautiful celebration of the power of stories. We had many writers from 35 countries who were also joining us in the village as we are gathering in the same way this year. So the controversy that we're talking about was at a moment where the conflict had just happened, and like every cultural organizations, we wrestled with the moment. And what I'd like to also just make sure that to add is that PEN America wants to be the organization that can model what it looks like to protect free speech, but to also challenge speech with more speech, to not to actually turn away from silence and erasure. Silence and erasure, in a way, is very destructive to the fabric of a democratic society. So I think that that's what our role is as an organization. I think we never, even through the controversy, we never stopped doing the work, which is to protect free expression for all and to advocate for the writers who had less of a voice, maybe at some point. So we're going to continue to do that work and do it in the way that this organization is set up to do.
So, Dinah, we'll get to a variety of authors and events scheduled for the festival this week. But how, for example, are you addressing the Middle East situation in these coming days as it relates to the PEN World Voices mission?
I mean, I believe it's on Thursday. There are two panels, one dedicated to telling stories from Palestine, and that looks at the ways Palestinian narratives have been framed before historically, and the ways Palestinian writers today are currently trying to reframe that story on their own terms. And there's also, I believe, the second panel happening also on Thursday that focuses on the Holocaust and the remembrance of the Holocaust through literature. Clarice can also correct me if I'm missing something. And I'm not sure if there's anything currently, because the organization and the organizing for the festival obviously begins long before the most recent war began. So I don't think we have anything right now that's scheduled to take place surrounding what's happening in Iran. But I know certainly we do have those two events happening that obviously are focused on the Middle East.
Clarice, anything to add?
What I'd like to add is we are not only tackling, current issues. I think that this festival has an amazing origin story with, post 9/11, Salman Rushdie, who was at the time the Pan America president, with Esther Allen, a translator, and Michael Roberts, founded this festival with this idea that in the time of war, in a time of kind of isolationist movement, when the U.S. was actually retreating onto itself, that it was really important to bring international writers to the U.S. to be in conversation with American writers about what connects us. Literature and stories, that's the true power of what we're celebrating with this festival. So it's not just about current issues, but it's about what's preoccupying us as citizens of this world and as citizens of this country.
Listeners, we can take a few phone calls or texts with questions or comments for our guests representing and leading the PEN World Voices Festival here in New York and in Los Angeles the next 3 days, or 4 days really if you count today. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. This can be on some of their festival event themes that we're going to get to, like free expression in a time of endangered democracy, or political forces affecting people's personal lives. This is around some books that have dystopian near future themes. We'll touch on that, or the controversy surrounding PEN America these last few years, or anything else related. I see they just issued a statement yesterday having to do with new pressure from the Trump administration on ABC because of something Jimmy Kimmel said. 212-433 WNYC, 433-9692. Call or text. All right, Dinal, I see that your opening event today will be about the endangered health of our democracy with three pretty acclaimed authors: Molly Jong-Fast, Phil Clay, the Marine veteran who's written books like Uncertain Ground, Citizenship in a Time of Endless Invisible War, and Judith Butler, author of Who's Afraid of Gender and many other books. Can you say anything more about that, like how those three connect to each other, or what aspects of endangered democracy might be the focus?
Well, I mean, I think, the threats to our democracy have been at the forefront of PEN America's work for a number of years now, and we've issued reports looking at the threats of disinformation to democracy, certainly looking at the threats the Trump administration continues to pose to our democracy. And what you see in that panel, I think, are three sort of wonderful, fantastic writers coming from different fields of expertise who can actually talk about the experience and their understanding of how our democracy is under threat. Phil Clay, as you noted, is both a former Marine and also a novelist and a journalist. We have an incredible scholar in Judith Butler, who understands, I think, perhaps more acutely than anybody else, just how profound the threats to LGBTQ rights are right now under this administration. So I think we've got an ability in not only this panel, but probably in all of our panels, to actually bring together a number of competing and sometimes diverse and sort of incredibly thoughtful and intelligent perspectives, and to hold them all together in one space and have one conversation, both among the panelists and the audience.
And Clarice, I see that you'll be moderating a panel on Friday with authors who've written what your release calls dystopian near future books that illustrate how political forces impact personal lives. That's with Leila Lalami, the Moroccan-American novelist and essayist, and New York-based Indian author Megha Majumdar, if I'm saying that right. Can you give us any examples of these dystopian near-future themes or what interests you about them?
Yeah, no, actually, I am moderating this conversation and I'm really excited. These are, two extraordinary writers. And if your listeners have not read them yet, I would definitely encourage them to pick up a copy, but mostly to join us on Friday and come in and hear from them directly. And so here, I think they both tackle very kind of current and immediate issues that we're wrestling with in our daily lives. One is the issue of surveillance and the way technology and the way technology is so embedded into our lives that the amount of data that exists about each of us and that is kind of exchanged and used by big technology company is affecting the way we move in the world and the way we are surveilled in some instances, and in the other is tackling the issue of climate and what happens when you are exist in a part of a world where you have to, it's a question of survival and what happens to how we behave, the ethics of who has access to which resources when scarcity arrives and is much closer to you in your daily life. So it's really interesting to have these two writers be in conversation with each other and actually wrestle with things that are very immediate to us in our daily life, but they wrote it in this kind of dystopian way. So as you can tell, I'm a fan, but also I'm inviting everybody to join us for this amazing conversation.
That's great. Listener writes, in the PEN discussion, it is clear that Gaza was a singular event for the organization. Can the speakers address why this was so different from other past issues? Do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I also was thinking I wanted to go back to also note, given the scale of destruction in Gaza, I think every organization that was responsible and watching what was happening knew that to respond forcefully was both necessary and also there's always going to be a need for more, right? The scale of death, of cultural destruction was larger than any one group, any one organization could ever account for. And I think PEN America, certainly like everyone else, tries and does its best to account and tries to speak to what's happening. But sometimes there is also just a question of scale and size, and the enormity of the tragedy, I think, defeats anybody who's trying to address it at all times. And I think, being asked to do more is, I think, a natural response to that destruction. It's a call for people to join together and work towards a more aggressive response. And I think PEN America certainly was able to do that. And I think we were able to do that in part because the writers in our community challenged us to do more, and we continue to do more. And we are now looking forward to the next part of the organization's future.
Clarice, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that, it was a singular event, but I mean, from my perspective, I think this is an organization that was responding at the same time to very serious threats to free expression in other parts of the world. I mean, we're doing tremendous work in Iran. I mean, this is even just, kind of brought to the foreground right now with the current war. We are still working very closely with writers in Ukraine. So I think that it could be the perception was such that this felt like a singular event, but I do want to assure your listeners that PEN America continued to do the work at its full capacity. We were able to continue doing our work with elevating the voices of writers from around the world. And we actually were able to focus very much on what was going on here at home with a new administration that in the first 100 days really were just kind of a source of the dismantling of some of our norms, some of the institutions, cultural institutions in this country. So we were on the front lines of pushing back and elevating these issues and using writers to speak about these issues. And I just want to also just kind of to put a finer point on it, PEN America is an organization of writers, is an organization whose mission is to defend free expression for all writers using the power of storytelling to do so. So we represent all the writers across the genres and we across ideologies. The goal is not to have writers who are part of our PEN community agree with each other. The one thing that they do agree on is the central role that we can play to defend free expression in this country. And this is the focus that we should have right now.
Jumping ahead to Saturday, Dee, now I see you'll be moderating a closing night event on how literature reflects the plurality of our world with Susan Choi, Tash Aw, Patricia Smith, and Madeline Teen. Does your own story exemplify this at all? I see you were born in Ethiopia, grew up in the U.S. from the age of 2. Your latest novel, Someone Like Us, is about a journalist of Ethiopian descent. Would you like to blurb your own book here and say something maybe about how it represents the theme of that closing event Saturday for the PEN World Voices?
I mean, I think not just my own books, but obviously the books of everyone on that panel, and probably the overwhelming majority of our writers reflects this kind of very diverse and complicated background in which our identities cannot be defined under one singular term. And yet at the same time, we share this kind of core fundamental humanity that we can recognize despite our differences in language and culture. I think we all try to pay attention to those differences as writers, and we want to respect those differences while also understanding that those differences are not the totality of who we are, and that in fact, underneath them is something far more fundamental, which is our shared collective humanity. And every time I think we can highlight that humanity, and every time we can bring those differences to the foreground, we kind of animate literature at its most powerful.
Can I digress from the festival for a minute? I see that PEN America issued a press release yesterday based on something in the news. It says, people aren't stupid. One day, President Trump demands Disney and ABC fire Jimmy Kimmel over his jokes. And lo and behold, the next day, his administration sicks the FCC on ABC to investigate the network's licensing. If comedians can't make jokes about the president without fear of government retaliation, then what's the First Amendment for? This is Free Speech 101, your press release says. Once again, the Trump administration is abusing federal regulatory power to silence the president's critics. We call on Disney, ABC's parent company, to stand firm in the face of this blatant intimidation and fight for the First Amendment. Can either of you say what ABC standing firm means, what PEN America is calling on the network to do?
I'll just say from my perspective, again, we have to safeguard a culture of free expression in the U.S. and safeguard the First Amendment. Jimmy Kimmel is a comedian, and we know what happens in history and in other parts of the world. They will come. Authoritarian governments will come after comedians, satirists first, writers first. And PEN America is here to speak up and to be very clear, to sound the alarm of what is happening right now in this country. So, we just need to protect the right for free expression, and comedians are performing their right to free speech and free expression when they create their satire and monologues, and this is no exception. So we're watching, and we will continue to speak up.
The joke that apparently got to Trump this time was Kimmel saying that Melania Trump has a glow like an expectant widow. And that was a couple of days before the assassination attempt on the president Saturday night. So they're saying he was somehow promoting violence. Similar, I guess, with the new criminal case against James Comey for writing out 8647 on the beach with seashells in a social media post. 86 means get rid of, 47 could be Trump, the 47th president. So allegedly, that was a call for assassination. Of course, Comey strongly denies that. Those may both be baseless charges and just more examples of trying to silence Trump's critics, Comey and Jimmy Kimmel. How do you grapple at PEN America, now, as a free expression institution, with finding a line between expressing strong points of view or even hate speech and promoting violence?
I mean, fortunately, we do have a First Amendment that kind of clearly, I think, helps us articulate and understand the difference between those two. And I think, even when you look at the ABC example, what you understand there, and I think what PEN America is really calling on ABC to do, is not to fall to the government's pressure, right? ABC, as they did last time, it was the affiliate networks that decided they were going to pull the show. The government can threaten, but the networks have to be able to have courage, and they need to be able to stand on the front lines and defend this collective right that belongs to all of us. What we want ABC to do, obviously, is to stand firm and protect their, not only their hosts, but also I think all of us who are dependent upon that free expression. And when it comes to that line between, our position has always been difficult, uncomfortable, sometimes speech that we find even reprehensible has to be made accessible. It has to be allowed, because without that, there's no way to ensure that we all maintain and are able to protect that same fundamental right. When speech begins to obviously cross that line into hate, when it becomes an incitement to violence, then obviously you've crossed over the First Amendment and you're no longer protected by that. So I think we have a clear sense of where that line stands, and I think we demand institutions, cultural organizations to be as generous and forward thinking as possible when it comes to protecting those free expression rights. Even if it's not necessarily a First Amendment issue, it's really important that institutions and organizations accommodate and make as much room possible for the range of speech that their audiences might hear.
Anything to add, Clarice?
No, except that if you allow me to return back to the World Voices Festival, I think that this is what someone will experience attending for 4 days. You'll be in rooms with brilliant writers, thinkers, storytellers, and you'll be in an audience with fellow readers, but also fellow citizens who are interested in discussing these issues in an environment that feels productive, in an environment where you'll be engaged, maybe challenged, but mostly inspired. So I'm welcoming everyone to join us starting tonight through Saturday. And this is very accessible. No ticket is over $20. A lot of tickets are free. Please join us.
I mentioned 3 of the particular events between now and Saturday. Is there any other? Because there are so many. And I guess they're mostly concentrated in Greenwich Village, but in many venues. Is that right, Clarice?
That's right. We have a few venues across the village and lots of choices at any hour. I would say that I would encourage people to actually look at the schedule for Saturday, because we have public art installations in Washington Square. We'll have some of the panels happening on our outdoor stage. And we also have something very cool, the Indie Lit Fair, presented in collaboration with CLMP, with 36, I think, independent presses and literary magazines will be there. Come and talk to them. Let's support independent publishers and literary magazines. They are part of the vibrant ecosystem that make up the literary community here in New York. So this is free. You can walk through around Washington Square and attend panels, but also go to the Lit Fair. So that's something that I would want to highlight for your audience.
And Now, if you want, you could highlight one other things. I'm looking at the list. I mean, there are so many well-known authors here, as well as maybe some that a lot of the listeners hadn't heard of, who they'd enjoy being exposed to. So many different events between now and Saturday. I don't know if you want to pick one other example, which doesn't elevate it over the others. It's just an example if you want, or just tell people how to get tickets, and then we're out of time.
I would just say that one of the remarkable things about this festival is that there's really nothing else like it. We really do bring the world to New York. We bring writers from as many different countries and perspectives as possible, and to have all of those writers assembled and in dialogue with each other and with the audience is something kind of remarkable. And to choose one panel over another would be impossible because all of them are going to do something remarkable.
Very, very politic. How do people get tickets?
You go to worldvoices.pen.org, or you can just go to pen.org, and you'll see the link for tickets.
Dinao Mengistu, PEN America president, and Clarice Rosas Sharif, one of two new PEN America CEOs. Good luck at the World Voices Festival the next 4 days. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much,
Brian.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. If you've needed admission to a hospital in the past few years, you might have spent hours, even days, in the emergency department first while waiting for a real hospital bed. Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal, senior contributing editor at KFF Health News and former ER physician, wrote about the issue of emergency room boarding, as it's known, for The Atlantic, and we'll talk to her in a minute. In 2024, by way of background, her husband, Andre, was admitted to the emergency room, the emergency department, for complications from esophageal cancer. After 36 hours in the ED on a stretcher in the hallway, he finally got a bed, quote, upstairs, which itself turned out to be an overflow area that lacked enough personnel. For the last months of his life, Rosenthal writes, her husband's mantra became, I will not go to the emergency room. One director of emergency medicine told her that hospitals now run like airlines and intentionally overbook in order to make money. The problem is in the way healthcare finance is structured, her source told her. It can increase the anguish of people who find themselves in emergency department limbo, who may not get a bed or have any semblance of privacy. And worst of all, it can lead to some patients falling through the cracks, which, of course, can be not just an inconvenience, but hazardous to their health. Joining us now to discuss her latest is Elizabeth Rosenthal, senior contributing editor at KFF Health News and a former ER physician herself. She's also author of the book, An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. This new piece for The Atlantic is titled, A Barbaric Problem in American Hospitals is Only Getting Bigger. Dr. Rosenthal, welcome back to WNYC.
Well, thanks for having me.
And listeners, we want to invite you in on this as well to help report this story. For those of you who work in emergency departments or patients for whom this sounds familiar, we invite your stories as well as your questions. How has ED or ER boarding changed over the past 5 years, in particular if you work in a hospital? For those of you who do, what are you noticing and how is it impacting your jobs and your patients? So nurses, nursing assistants, doctors, directors of emergency departments, anyone else relevant, help us report this story. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. And again, patients or caregivers of patients who've been to the ER, if you had a recent experience you'd like to share, we invite that from you too. Did you spend many hours, maybe even a few days in the emergency department recently? What was that like, and what would you like others to know about your experience that may help make things better? 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. You can call or you can text. So, Dr. Rosenthal, as I said in the intro, you opened the piece with your husband Andre's mantra in the last months of his life, I will not go to the emergency room. And so, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss. And you're right that you understood that his adamant rejection came because most prior visits had, as you write, morphed into extended trips into a terrifying medical underworld, to a purgatory known as emergency department boarding. So tell us what boarding is and what the 36-hour experience was like.
Well, boarding is if a patient goes to the ER, which is the front door of hospitals for every patient now, and it's determined they need admission. And then the question is, okay, is there a bed available for that admitted patient on a ward? And the problem is there are too few beds for the patients who need admission from the emergency room, particularly if they're older or sicker. And we'll go into the finances of that later. And so they park these patients, like my husband, who, had stage 4 esophageal cancer and was dying on a stretcher in the emergency room. Maybe you're in one of the bays. Maybe you move to the hallway. Maybe you move to the an ER overflow area. Technically speaking, you're admitted, so you have some physicians, a team upstairs who knows about you, who may be writing orders. But if you say, hey, I need to use the bathroom. And remember, there are only 2 bathrooms for everyone in an emergency room, or I'm short of breath. It's very unclear who needs to respond to that. And ER physicians and nurses have complained bitterly about this for years. It's not, it existed to a smaller degree in the past, but it's just grown and grown, particularly since the pandemic. And it's just awful. I mean, that admission you're referring to, my husband was confused. He was still getting treatment, and it was unclear if the cancer had gone to his brain, which it hadn't, but he needed an inpatient evaluation and to get his mental status better. And as you can imagine, I mean, this is a guy who was totally compos mentis the day before. Uh, and he was a little confused, but 2 days in the emergency room, stuck on a stretcher, rails up, as I said, not being able to get around, not knowing whether it's day or night, codes going on, alarms blaring. By the end of the second day, he was convinced that, the doctors were like somehow in a conspiracy to get him, and I was their paid accomplice. So I was like, how can you, why would you go back to something like that? It's just, you come to an emergency room if you need admission because you're seriously ill, and what you get is not good medicine. And I think ER doctors have been writing about this. The American College of Emergency Medicine has complained about it bitterly. And I just wanted to show what it feels like to be a patient or the loved one of a patient going through this experience. And it's awful. And I'm sure everyone, says, oh, yeah, I waited 4 days at this hospital, or I waited, 2 days next to a corpse at this hospital. And I think so many of us have experienced it, but we're not really near a solution, which is takes a lot. It's not really only the hospital's fault, or only, and certainly not the doctors or the patients or the nurses' fault. Everyone's trying to do their best in terms of the personnel. But, hospitals are partly to blame, but we have to talk about the larger system to really understand what's going on here.
And so when you pushed to move him to a bed upstairs, as they call it, he was, because emergency rooms are almost always on the ground floor, he was transported to what you describe as an ED overflow area on a former labor and delivery floor. You write that it was kitted out with some of the trappings of an actual ward, such as real beds and bathrooms, but not the most important one, adequate personnel, unquote, from your article. You write that two people died in 3 days in that room. How widespread is this kind of improvised overflow arrangement?
Oh, totally widespread. I mean, and you're kind of lucky if a hospital tries that solution because at least you're not in some, hallway on the way to radiology for 2 days. But, you get an actual bed, but it feels like a kind of, and I don't say this lightly, a warehousing of patients who have no hope, who are destined to die or have dementia. And I think the most striking thing to me in that the days he was on that ward was, I said, gosh, his sheets haven't been changed in 3 days. And the nurse looked at me and said, well, there's the linen cart. I'm like, oh, okay. Is this what we're paying, $2,000 a night for? And they did eventually come and change it for me, but it was pretty nightmarish.
Let me take a few stories from listeners, and then we'll get into more of the structural reasons that it's like this and what you think can be done about it. Let's go first to Tara in Metuchen. Tara, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear just fine, Tara. Thanks for calling.
Awesome. A couple of years ago, my daughter had a mental health crisis, which brought her to the ER at a very good hospital near us. She was 16 or 17, so this took her to the pediatric ER, but really, she was by far the oldest patient there. And because it was a mental health situation, she was put in a special room off in a corner of the emergency area. The room had no windows. Out the door, you could not see any light from outside. She was stuck there for, 3 nights or maybe 4, waiting for a bed to open up in another facility, a proper mental health facility. And during that time, she was just basically rotating between screaming and shouting and being medicated and sleeping and awake. And it was completely horrific for her, for us who were with her. Again, she couldn't get outside for a breath of fresh air. She couldn't see the outdoors. She really could not leave her room. It just was, I'm pretty sure she has PTSD from that experience. We probably do too. She pretty much now refuses to go to the emergency room if needed. It was not a good experience.
Tara, thank you very much. Disturbing as that is, it's probably useful for people to hear it from you in that way. Let's go to another patient with another story, actually a story of one way that he's getting around the kind of thing we've been describing here so far. Jack in Westfield, you're on WNYC. Hi, Jack.
Hi, good morning, Brian. You're a national treasure. For your guest consideration, my mother is an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient, and so she's in assisted living. And whenever she has a fall, which has happened about 6 or 8 times over the last year, she gets transported to the hospital, which is the standard protocol for the facility that she's in. But they normally transport her to a Trauma One, North Jersey, very good hospital in a very wealthy part of the state. And we have literally stopped having her sent there, and we choose for the local community hospital, which is really not the best place for for stroke care or cardiac arrest care, because the situation is just as your guest has described. You get assigned to the orange section, location 5, or you're in the red section, location 2. You're there for 36 hours. It's very difficult to get information from the nurses and doctors who are working really hard, but it is literally, it's almost like the Port Authority bus terminal at rush hour. And so my siblings and I have decided, for our mothers, for our sanity and for our mother's sanity, because there's no privacy. And, we just say, you know what, let's go to the local community hospital where we know she's going to get a room. We know the PET scan of the head and chest is going to come back negative, and we'll get her back to where she lives as soon as possible.
Jack, thank you for telling that story. Dr. Rosenthal, do you think that that's a way out for many people. Obviously, it depends what kinds of hospitals are available in any given area. But maybe people have an assumption that the larger, big name hospitals are going to be the places for better care. And maybe it is some of the smaller community hospitals where, people may not think they have as much to offer, that don't have this emergency room crowding or boarding issue. Or maybe Jack's is a one off. I don't know.
No, I think he's pointing to an important hack. The problem is, what do we mean by better care? The smaller community hospitals are, in fact, not the places that have big problems with ED boarding. It is the big, famous medical centers, the level one trauma centers. But, if you're in a situation like I was, like Andre was, where you're getting complicated cancer care at a particular hospital, that's where you have to go, right? So if it's something simple, sure, you can go to the community hospital. You'll get a bed much quicker there, but you may not have the expertise that's needed to be treated. And I think, we can talk about the reasons why it is these big impressive hospitals that have the biggest problem.
Well, let's talk about that. And listeners, if you're just joining us, my guest is Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal, senior contributing editor at KFF Health News and a former ER physician who wrote about the issue of emergency room boarding, that is, staying in the emergency room for many hours or even days before you can get a room upstairs, as they call it, in a regular bed. Wrote about this for The Atlantic, and her article is called Barbaric is a quote that we're going to hear why in a minute. A barbaric problem in American hospitals is only getting bigger. So the question of why. You went back to your old colleagues to ask how this happened. An ER doctor at Boston's Beth Israel Deaconess, Adrian Heimovich, told you, quote, everyone knows about this problem and no one cares enough to do anything about it. It's barbaric. That's where the strong word in your headline comes from. So What's your understanding of why this is the case?
Well, it's really multifactorial. I mean, one thing, as we said in the story, is that hospitals run like businesses, right? That's what I've been writing about for 30 years. And, if you want to have beds available for ER patients, you don't want to run at 100% capacity. You want to run at maybe 90% capacity. So there'll be beds available. But from the hospital's business standpoint, that view, an empty bed is a money loser, right? It's staffed, it's sitting there, you got oxygen. So you want to keep those beds full all the time. So now hospitals run at 100% capacity or near it if they can. When I was an emergency room physician, and this was now decades ago, if the hospital was full, they would cancel elective admissions. Now, no hospital does that because those elective admissions that need beds, those are hip replacements, they may be a heart procedure. Those are big money makers. So you want beds filled with people who need lucrative care, right? So that's one reason why they're full all the time. And another reason why it's so hard for the patients in the emergency room is if you're older or sicker, or stage 4 esophageal cancer or any other cancer like my husband was, you can go to a bed, but you're not gonna be a big moneymaker. You likely don't need anything that's, a big procedure or an operation. You just kind of need a tune-up and some evaluation. And that's not very lucrative, and it takes a lot of time because you have to schedule tests with radiology that may not be able to do them for 3 days. And the more systemic issue is even if those people are cleared to go home, there's an there's an enormous shortage of rehab beds in this country. They very likely can't just go home to their previous living environment if they've worsened or their condition has worsened. So we don't have rehab beds. We don't have what we used to have, transition units, which help people or kind of lower level of care unit to transition out of the hospital. There's an enormous shortage of nursing home beds. So that's a factor we have to deal with. And beyond that, even is, hey, if you need, it's determined you need to go into hospice, which we were trying to arrange for my husband. You need to get insurance approval because your insurer may only have contracts with certain hospice providers. And that's a whole thing. And then if you're on Medicare Advantage, for example, they can say, oh, we're denying this transfer to rehab. Maybe we don't think you need it. And you have to be in the hospital 3 nights in order to qualify. So then they deny it, then the hospital appeals. So those patients can block a bed, producing no income for days and days on end. So it's a complex problem that is solvable, but as Dr. Hamovich said, nobody cares enough to solve it.
Let's hear another patient story. Tom in Manhattan. You're on WNYC with Dr. Rosenthal. Hi, Tom.
Hi. My experience is not as extreme as some of the other patients, but it just typifies what a kind of standard situation is for someone. I'm a transplant patient, so I'm immunosuppressed. A transplant has a lot of sequelae, little things that happen, infections and stuff like that. And in order to get treated at the big hospital, big, wonderful hospital, I have to go through the emergency room. And each time I go through the emergency room, I'm subjected to an environment which is filled with all sorts of germs which put me at risk. And I'm there from between 6 and 36 hours. So if anything goes wrong, I have to go through this limbo each time it happens. And that's just the system. There's no other way around it. It's not the right way to operate. I got to tell you I'm in there with people who are sicker than me, much sicker than me, not as sick as me. There are hundreds of people in the various bays of the emergency room, all of whom are in the same boat that I am.
Sounds very frustrating. Did you ever ask anybody there, the staff, why is it like that? Was it always like this? What can we do about this? I know it's not really up to them because it's structural, but have you?
Well, the emergency room staff, they are wonderful. I mean, that goes without saying, right? They're heroes. They just take what they're given. That's just their job. The people who are in charge of the program that I'm on, just don't. They say we don't have any choice. This is the only way we can admit you to the hospital. And they
Tom,
guess it.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say I guess that comes from the hospital administration.
Yeah. Thank you for your call. I appreciate it. I'm sorry you're going through this, but again, it's good for people to hear that story at that level of detail. And so, Dr. Rosenthal, you're right in your Atlantic piece that hospitals today run like airlines and intentionally overbook. Gabe Kellen, if I'm saying that right, the director of emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins, told you the problem isn't inefficiency, it's the way healthcare finance is structured. So is that new? Because I think part of your point is that when you were practicing in the ER, it wasn't always like this.
Yeah, well, remember, I converted to journalism in the early 90s, so it's been a long time. But yes, a bunch of things have changed. I mean, hospitals have huge administrative staffs. They pay their CEOs a lot of money. They need to pay more nurses more post-pandemic, which They probably should, right? Nurses have been underpaid for years. But as I said, there were a couple of things when I was an ER doc. The hospital, if there were, would cancel elective admissions. If there weren't enough beds, they didn't run at full capacity. They went on diversion, meaning we won't take any more ambulances because we're just filled to the gills until we can get some of these patients out of here, either discharged or up to a room. And the big problem that the last caller refers to is physicians on the staff of hospitals used to do what were called direct admits. They would decide a patient need to be admitted and get them a bed assignment, and they would go to an admitting office and go up to the bed. Now, hospitals have decided that every admit has to come through the emergency department. So they get an ER evaluation. I don't know, you could argue that it's to make sure the ER docs are making sure that they really need to be in the hospital. But there's also kind of a financial motivation to do that. I mean, you get a lot of money for ER evaluations. I noticed on my husband's explanation of benefit statements, we were charged, as if he were in a hospital bed each day he was boarding in the ER. So they make money doing that. And then, eventually they get up to a bed on the floor. But if you have a burst appendix or a hot appendix, you'll get that bed pretty quickly. But if you're maybe an older diabetic person with a foot wound that needs antibiotics and dressing changes for a few days, that you lie in the corridor, and boy, no one, people like to talk to the doctors and say, what can you do? But I think anyone who's watched The Pit, one of the subplots that people like me notice is Dr. Robbie following the administrator around saying, get some of these people upstairs, get them out of here. It's not good medicine. We can't take care of people. We can't take care of new patients. So the physicians, both your primary care physician or the person who's caring for your transplant, nor the ER doctors really have any power over this.
Here's a text from a doctor who writes, "Thank you for bringing up this topic." And he or she adds, "Sorry for your loss," and writes, "I am a physician upstairs and worked for a major New York health system for 25 years. This problem has been going on for 20 plus years. One year when the hospital I worked at had an average occupancy rate for the year of 103%, meaning more patient days than bed days, it had an operating margin of 2%. This was, I think, around 2010. Economics requires that hospitals are more than full to break even. Agree this is a terrible problem, but I don't know what the best next steps are. As things are, we can't afford the care offered. I'm all for single payer at this point," writes that doctor. So to finish up, the one concrete policy step that you report on in your Atlantic piece is a new rule that begins with voluntary reporting of boarding times in emergency rooms. That would start next year and become mandatory in 2028 with Medicare reimbursement penalties for bad performing hospitals starting a couple of years after that. So tell us a little bit of how that would work. And do you agree with the doctor who wrote in that single payer would be full or partial cure?
Well, first of all, I'm a journalist, so I can't say I agree that the solution to the U.S. healthcare problem is there are many, including single payer, and we are doing none of them. So that's what I'd like to say. In terms of this new program that did go through at the end of the Biden administration, there was a report on emergency room boarding that suggested that a panel be convened to figure out solutions, which are not easy. The Trump administration came in. The DOGE program kind of decimated that particular part of CMS, and the panel never happened. But they did implement a rule that you're talking about, that gosh, why wait 2 years for mandatory reporting? And then this kind of nebulous Medicare penalties. I think the problem is there's so much money to be made, and I'm sorry to talk about this in financial terms, but this is how the bean counters see it. To be made by ER boarding, even though it's horrible for patients, that, how big a penalty my worry is the penalty will be like, okay, fine, we'll pay that.
Right.
And also enforcing hospital compliance and collecting this statistic.
But just one quick follow-up, and we've got 30 seconds. When you say and others say there's so much money to be made, at least in New York, the hospitals are nonprofit. So presumably they're trying to do whatever they can to work with those small margins that the former ER physician wrote, or the upstairs physician wrote about, rather than trying to, quote, make money because they don't have shareholders or owners. What would that question miss? 30 seconds.
That question would miss that most nonprofit hospitals work like businesses. And, you go into the lobbies of these hospitals and, the big marble lobbies, the good art, the pianos, they don't look like nonprofits, and they don't act like nonprofits. They define their profit as surplus, and they build more things, and they pay their executives more. So there's a massive need to restructure how we think about what a hospital should be too, so that, they run on narrow margins, but they also spend money on a lot of stuff which isn't essential to healthcare, and that's all wrong.
Dr. Elizabeth Rosenthal, author of the book that originally came out in 2017, An American Sickness, How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back, now has her piece in The Atlantic called A Barbaric Problem in American Hospitals is Only Getting Bigger, about boarding in emergency rooms. Thank you for sharing it with our listeners.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's such an important topic.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.